Tonight, we are stepping into a world of candlelight, silk, soft voices, and beautiful exhaustion. From a distance, the life of a Regency woman can look almost dreamlike. Pale gowns drifting through warm drawing rooms, polished floors, teacups catching the light, a neat bow, a careful smile, everything calm, everything lovely, everything so perfectly arranged that it almost seems weightless. But what if waking up inside that world did not feel graceful at all? What if, before breakfast, before gossip, before the first visitor crossed the threshold, you were already being measured by how you stood, how you spoke, how you moved, and how well you hid the effort of being watched? Because that was the strain at the center of it. Not great public drama every hour, but 1,000 small acts performed correctly. A lowered gaze, a quiet laugh, a hand resting lightly on porcelain, a walk across the room that must look natural, though nothing about it could be careless. To be a Regency woman was not simply to appear elegant. It was to keep appearing elegant over and over again until elegance itself became a kind of labor. And that is where the story becomes softer, stranger, and much more human than the fantasy version. The real burden was often miniature, not one catastrophe, but dozens of tiny chances to be judged. A smile too warm, a reply too quick, a posture too loose, a breath too visible. Even ordinary comfort could begin to look suspicious in a world that admired control. So for a little while, let us move slowly into that world, not at the height of a ball, not in the middle of scandal, but in the quietest place possible. A bedroom in the early morning, curtains still drawn, air still cool. The house only half awake, because the first performance of the day began there, in private, before anyone would have called it public at all. Tonight, we are stepping into a world of candlelight, silk, soft voices, and beautiful exhaustion. From a distance, the life of a Regency woman can look almost dreamlike. Pale gowns drifting through warm drawing rooms, polished floors reflecting candlelight, teacups lifted with perfect fingers, a small bow of ribbon at the wrist, a low voice, a neat curl, a soft smile that seems to ask nothing from the world at all. Everything appears composed, everything appears light, everything appears to float, and perhaps that is why the reality underneath it can feel so surprising. Because what if waking up inside that world did not feel graceful at all? What if before breakfast, before gossip, before a caller arrived, before the first curtsy of the day ever touched the floor, you were already being measured? Measured by your posture, your timing, your tone, your calmness, your restraint. Measured by how gently you crossed a room, how carefully you greeted another person, how well you concealed the simple fact that being watched takes energy. That is the tension at the center of this world, not constant public scandal, not dramatic collapse at every turn, but something quieter and more tiring than that. A life built from tiny acts performed correctly, a lowered gaze that must not linger too long, a laugh that must be warm but not too free, a reply that must be pleasant but never too eager, a way of sitting, sipping, turning, listening, folding your hands, lifting your chin, and arranging your face so that no one could accuse you of having been careless with yourself. To be a Regency woman was not simply to look elegant. It was to perform elegance all day long, under constant observation. The day begins in softness, before the household fully stirs, before footsteps begin to pass in the corridor, before doors open, and voices travel from room to room. The bedroom still belongs to that pale suspended hour when everything seems kinder than it will later become. The curtains are embroidered with winding leaves and faded flowers, and the morning light comes through them slowly, not in a flood, but in a thin buttery wash that settles over the bed, the carpet, the washstand, the small polished things waiting on the dressing table. The air is cool near the floor. The bed is warm where sleep has left its shape behind. For a few lingering moments, The room feels gentle enough to forgive anyone for being human in it. The mattress gives softly beneath you as you wake, feather-filled and faintly uneven, holding the last weight of dreams. The coverlet is slightly creased. One ribbon has slipped loose in the night. A lock of hair rests where it should not. Nothing is dramatic. Nothing is wrong. And yet already, in ways both quiet and practiced, the evidence of being an ordinary sleeping person will soon need to be smoothed away. Then the maid enters. She does not break the stillness so much as join it. A curtain is drawn back by an inch, then a little more. The gold in the room shifts. Light reaches the basin. The pitcher catches a small gleam. Linen is lifted. A brush is set ready. The room remains soft. But no longer aimless. Morning has begun to organize itself, and with that, the private body begins its slow transition into the visible one. Hair loosened by the pillow is no longer simply hair. It must be arranged. Skin warmed by sleep is no longer simply skin. It must be cooled, freshened, cleared of any trace that the night has truly happened. Shoulders are encouraged down and back. The chin rises slightly. The face, still drowsy a moment ago, is guided toward composure. Even before a gown is fastened or a visitor received, the work has begun. The washing itself is gentle. Cool water in a porcelain basin. A cloth wrung softly, then pressed to the forehead, the cheeks, the throat. The feeling is clean and faintly bracing, enough to wake the skin without disturbing the hush of the room. The brush moves through the hair in long, patient strokes. Fabric whispers as fresh garments are laid out. A drawer opens. A ribbon is chosen. A crease is smoothed from the bedding. The sounds are so small, they almost seem to belong to another, kinder life. That is what makes the morning so interesting, physically. It is soft. Emotionally, it is not, because even here, in this quiet room, before society has fully arrived, presentation is already taking shape. The maid is not only helping her wake, she is helping her become readable, tidy, fresh, controlled, fit to be seen. Sleep itself begins to look like something that must be edited down to a more acceptable version. The face must not seem swollen with rest. The posture must not suggest heaviness. The body must emerge from the bed already moving toward grace. Even waking up was not entirely private. It was the first quiet rehearsal for being seen, and still there is tenderness in the ritual, the low morning light, the cool basin water, the slow brushing of hair, the softness of linen against the skin. For a little while, these small domestic motions create a gentler rhythm than the world outside the room will allow. There is no need yet for smiling conversation, for social timing, for measured laughter, for the invisible calculations of the drawing room. There is only the hush of preparation. The calm before correction becomes more formal. Morning in Regency society was not recovery. It was preparation for judgment. And yet that judgment did not arrive all at once. It came by degrees, first in the mirror, then in the angle of the shoulders, then in the smoothing of hair, the straightening of linen, the quiet removal of every sign that the body had been fully at rest. By the time she is ready to leave the bedroom, she must already look as though the day has found her composed. The room, however, remains lovely to the last. The bed still holds its warmth. The curtains still glow softly at the edges. The brush rests on the table. A little water still trembles in the basin. It is a beautiful place in which to be prepared for scrutiny, which may be why the process can seem so calm from the outside. But calm is not the same as freedom, and softness is not the same as ease. Soon, even this gentler hour will narrow into something firmer. The loose comfort of sleep will give way to structure. The body, only just washed and steadied, will be shaped more deliberately now, into gown, into posture, into the first unforgiving lines of the day. The maid returns, and with her comes the true beginning of the day. Until now, the morning has still belonged partly to softness. Cool water, brushed hair, pale light on the curtains, the quiet mercy of a room not yet full of eyes. But once the garments are brought forward and arranged in order, that gentler hour begins to close. The bed remains behind her, still warm with the shape of sleep, while the day ahead gathers itself in layers of fabric, ribbons, fastenings, and laces. First the linen, then the gown prepared to fall properly once the body beneath it has been corrected, and then the stays, waiting with their calm, familiar authority. They do not look dramatic when they are held in the maid's hands. They look purposeful, structured, almost neat, but the woman standing before them already knows what they will require. She turns slightly, the maid steps in, the garment is placed around the body with practiced care, aligned at the waist, steadied at the back, held in position while the laces hang loose for one last easy moment. There is always a small pause before the tightening begins, and in that pause the body still feels mostly like its own. Then the maid starts to pull, not sharply, not cruelly. The first tug only settles the stays into place. The next begins to narrow and define. Then another, firmer now, and another after that, each one drawing the body inward and upward at once. The waist gathers, the back lengthens, the shoulders ease into a straighter line. The chest lifts, breathing, which only moments ago belonged to sleep and privacy, becomes smaller, tidier, more deliberate. The rhythm is steady, pull, pause, smooth, pull, pause. Adjust. The maid's hands know exactly how much to tighten and where to stop. Fabric whispers, laces slide, a crease is flattened, a fastening is checked. The room remains quiet enough that even these little sounds begin to feel ceremonial. The body is not rushed into refinement. It is guided there, patiently, until the shape expected by the world begins to appear. And with that shape comes a new set of rules. A deep breath is no longer casual. Reaching must be done with more thought. Turning becomes narrower, sitting more careful, standing more exact. Even the smallest gesture has to learn the boundaries of this new frame. Before the mind has fully stepped into the day, the body has already been taught its limits. The corset is not just fashion. It is a machine that turns a living body into a social shape. That is why it mattered so much. It did not merely create a silhouette for others to admire. It trained posture, restrained movement, reduced looseness, and gave visible form to discipline itself. In this world, refinement was not only something a woman displayed. It was something she wore against her ribs, something tied firmly into place before she ever entered a room. And yet the ritual holds its own strange comfort too. Because repetition has a soothing power, the maid knows the order. The woman being dressed knows the stages by feel, the first settling of the stays, the gradual tightening at the waist, the lifted line through the spine. The moment when the mirror begins to reflect not sleep, not softness, but readiness. There is something oddly reassuring in that familiarity, as if once the laces are tied, the day can at least become recognizable. Difficult, yes, but recognizable. She turns toward the glass. Now the transformation becomes visible. The gown falls differently over the body shaped beneath it. The waist is cleaner now, the posture firmer, the whole figure more composed, more legible, more in keeping with what the house and the world beyond it expect to see. She does not necessarily look more comfortable. She looks more prepared, and in Regency society, that was often the closest thing to safety a woman could wear. The final adjustments are made in silence, a sleeve smoothed, a fold corrected, a ribbon straightened, the line of the back lightly checked. Chin lifted once more. The woman who woke in the quiet bed is still here, of course, but now she has been translated into the language society prefers. Controlled, elegant, and slightly armored. At last the maid steps back. The laces are tied. The silhouette is finished. She takes a careful breath, then another, feeling the narrower rhythm that will carry her through the hours ahead. One step is tested, then a second. The body moves differently now, more contained, more deliberate, already learning how to appear effortless inside effort. And dressed at last, she can leave the bedroom and face the next test of the morning, breakfast, where even hunger must behave beautifully. The breakfast room looks, at first glance, like one of the gentlest parts of the day. Morning light lies softly across the white cloth, touching the silver, the china, the glass, and the polished wood, with that pale, forgiving brightness that makes everything appear calmer than it truly is. The table is neat, balanced, and almost reassuring. Small dishes wait in orderly silence: bread, eggs, preserves, tea. Chairs are set in their proper places. The fire, if there is one, has settled into a mild and respectable warmth. Voices remain low. For a moment, the whole room gives the impression that breakfast might be a mercy, one of the few ordinary pleasures left untouched by social strain. But in this world, even breakfast has manners before it has comfort. By the time she enters and takes her seat, smoothing her gown carefully beneath her, the meal has already become a small examination. Not a frightening one, not a dramatic one. Just the kind of gentle, continuous test that Regency life seems to prefer. Appetite must not arrive too openly. Hunger must never look impatient. A lady may eat, certainly, but she must do so in a way that suggests she has entered the room with excellent breeding, and only the faintest practical need for food. So the first task is not choosing what she likes, it is choosing what can be eaten beautifully. Soft things are safest, quiet things, things that do not crack, crumble too boldly, drip at the wrong moment, or force the mouth into any expression of obvious effort. A little bread may do, if taken in pieces so small they almost seem apologetic. Eggs are manageable, provided they remain well behaved. A spoonful of preserve is possible if guided with caution. But toast is a danger. Toast may look harmless resting on its plate in the morning light, but one incautious bite can turn it into an announcement. Christmas is rarely a friend to decorum. Bacon, if it appears, offers a similar challenge, not because it is improper in itself, but because it lacks silence. It crackles, it resists invisibility, it asks to be enjoyed, which is already more feeling than breakfast should publicly contain. So she chooses carefully, a controlled portion, a manageable texture, a bite small enough to be chewed without drawing attention to the fact that chewing is happening at all. That is the strange elegance of the thing. The meal is set before her, but she must not seem taken by it. The body may need food, but the face must not reveal relief. The hand may lift a fork, but not with too much readiness. The jaw may move, but with such moderation that eating appears less like appetite and more like a mild social accomplishment. Even swallowing, that most ordinary and private of actions, must slip quietly into the rhythm of the table, unnoticed if possible, graceful if not. Breakfast was not nourishment first, it was evidence of discipline. Around her, the same little performance unfolds in perfect miniature. Someone lifts a teacup with measured fingers. Someone else sets down a spoon so gently it barely disturbs the saucer. A knife passes through butter with no trace of greed. A napkin is adjusted, a chair is entered and exited with calm precision. Conversation moves softly over the table like thin morning air, touching on weather, family matters, perhaps some harmless expectation for the day ahead. Nothing too pointed, nothing too alive, nothing that might ask a hungry person to laugh at the wrong moment. That timing matters too. One must not speak while still finishing a bite. One must not answer too quickly if the mouth is occupied. One must not pause so long over swallowing that it suggests either awkwardness or appetite. The safest speaker at breakfast is the one whose mouth always seems empty at exactly the proper moment, as though the meal has arranged itself around her sentences out of pure respect. Tea offers a small comfort in all this. Its warmth is real, even if the elegance around it is largely theatrical. The steam rises in a soft ribbon. The porcelain feels light and thin in the hand. A careful sip gives the appearance of ease, and perhaps, for a second or two, even creates it. The room remains bright. The china catches the light. Gentle voices continue. Someone asks a harmless question. Someone gives a harmless answer. The whole strange ritual keeps itself within such a soft hush that it almost becomes soothing, despite everything. And that may be why breakfast in this world feels so memorable. It takes one of the simplest human acts and wraps it in caution, poise, and absurdly fine judgment. A table full of food becomes a lesson in restraint, i.e., a bite of bread becomes a matter of self-command. A sip of tea becomes proof that the body can be managed, softened, and made presentable even in hunger. Even appetite here must appear well bred at last. The plates empty by degrees. The tea cools, and the first meal of the day comes to its polite conclusion. She rises having done more than eat. She has already shown control, timing, quietness, and care. And now the body that has survived the breakfast table must leave the chair and greet the room itself, which brings a new kind of precision into play. The knees, the spine, and the fragile mathematics evolve, and the more gently you look at that, the stranger it becomes. The pressure was often miniature, not one great disaster, but dozens of very small chances to misstep, to stand a little too loosely, to smile with too much feeling, to reveal impatience, boredom, appetite, annoyance, warmth, curiosity, or any other emotion that might suggest you were not made entirely of discipline and silk. Even comfort could become suspicious if it showed too clearly on the body. That is what makes this world so fascinating for sleep history. It is intimate, it is soft on the surface, and yet, beneath the polished manners, it hums with effort. So much of the strain lived in details small enough to be missed from a distance. The hand on the teacup, the measured breath, the carefully neutral expression, the invisible work of remaining graceful minute after minute in a society that could read meaning into almost anything. And yet, for all of that pressure, this is not a story we need to enter through noise. We do not need to begin in scandal or in a ballroom or in the middle of some social disaster. It is gentler, and perhaps more revealing, to begin in private, in the hour before the day fully forms around a woman. In the quiet of a bedroom where the curtains are still mostly drawn, where the light is pale and patient, where the air is cool, and where, for a few moments, the world has not yet fully entered. That is where the lived experience starts to come into focus. Not in the grand performance, but in the first preparation for it. The first breath, the first movement, the first awareness that the body must soon be arranged into composure. Before breakfast, before callers, before gossip, before music, tea, letters, or polite conversation, before any public ritual begins, the private one is already there. So for a little while, let us move slowly into that room and into that hour as gently as possible. Not as spectators watching from a distance, but as someone waking inside the day itself, where even the earliest quiet could carry the faint outline of expectation. And the first test began there, in the morning light, before the woman had even left her room. To enter a room is one thing, to greet it properly is another. By the time breakfast has ended, and the last soft sounds of cups and saucers begin to fade, the next demand of the morning is already waiting. Now the body must do openly what it has been practicing in smaller ways since waking. It must show control, rank awareness, calmness, and respect all at once, and all without ever appearing strained. That is the work of the curtsy. From a distance, the motion can seem almost slight. A lowering of the body, a small gathering of the skirts. Careful rise, something light and decorative perhaps, easy enough to admire from across a polished room. But at close range, and especially when repeated many times, the curtsy reveals itself as something far more exacting. It is posture, timing, balance, social reading, and physical endurance folded into a single graceful act. Everything about it must be measured. The back cannot collapse. The shoulders must remain quiet. The chin lowers only so much. The eyes dip, but not too long. The knees bend deeply enough to express proper deference, yet not so deeply that the gesture begins to look clumsy, theatrical, or overeager. Then comes the rise, which must be smooth, controlled, and perfectly timed, as if the body had never doubted its own balance for even a second. That alone would be enough to make the curtsy tiring. But the real burden lies in the fact that one curtsy is never just one curtsy. Each person in the room asks for a different version of the same movement. An older lady receives a deeper greeting, slower and steadier, with all the quiet gravity proper to age and rank. An equal requires something lighter, still respectful, but less weighted. A rival may be given a curtsy so perfectly correct that no fault can be found in it, yet with just enough coolness to ensure that warmth has not been wasted. Then there are gentlemen whose presence changes the charge of the room simply by existing in it. To curtsy to a man is to show respect without suggesting intimacy, composure without boldness, and awareness without invitation. The body must say very little, while being read as though it has said a great deal. That is what makes the whole thing so exhausting. Every curtsy must be calibrated before it is performed. So she crosses the room and begins, one greeting for an aunt whose standards are high and whose memory is long. Another for a lady of similar age, where equality must be acknowledged without slipping into ease. Another for someone known to be observant, and therefore dangerous in the gentle way only very observant people can be. With each approach, the body adjusts, slightly deeper here, slightly lighter there, more warmth in one glance, less softness in another. The motion may repeat, but the meaning never does. Even the room seems built to intensify the ritual. The floors are polished, the carpets soften some steps but not all. The skirts must be handled lightly so they fall well and do not shift awkwardly beneath the feet. Chairs are placed where they can be seen from multiple angles. Older ladies sit with the ponente, a sapient kind of stillness that suggests they miss very little. The whole setting is beautiful, but beauty does not make it easier. It simply makes the labor look finer. A curtsy is not a small motion. It is a social sentence written with the whole body. In Regency society, respect was not only spoken, it was bent into the knees, and after several such greetings, the body begins to register the cost. The thighs feel it first, then the lower back, then the breath, which was already shortened by stays and posture, begins to grow more careful still. Yet the face must remain calm. The expression must suggest that this gentle rising and lowering belongs naturally to the morning, as though the body were made not of bone and muscle, but of etiquette itself. And perhaps that is why the curtsy becomes so memorable. It is repetitive enough to feel ritualistic, graceful enough to resemble a dance, and tiring enough to reveal how much effort refinement could demand. Lower and rise, lower and rise. The skirts dip, the spine steadies, the gaze softens. The body continues, each motion polished by repetition, until the very rhythm of it begins to sound almost soothing, even while the knees might disagree. There is something strangely elegant in that repetition, not because it is easy, but because it hides difficulty so well. The room sees grace. The body feels labor. Between those two things, Regency etiquette lives. At last the round of greetings nears its end. The room has been acknowledged. Rank has been honored. The required gestures have been distributed with all the proper adjustments. She rises from the final curtsy with her composure intact, her skirts settled, her posture still obediently straight. Though somewhere beneath all that control, the body has already spent more energy than the day is willing to admit. And now that the body has spoken in bows, bends, and carefully measured rises, the mouth must begin its own more delicate performance, saying just enough, revealing almost nothing. In polite society, conversation is meant to feel effortless. It drifts across the room as lightly as steam above a teacup, as though no one has prepared for it, as though no one is measuring it, as though a circle of well-bred women simply happened to gather in silk and morning light and begin speaking in a naturally graceful way. Chairs are arranged in an easy curve, hands rest lightly around cups and saucers, a skirt settles with a soft whisper against the carpet. Someone smiles, someone else inclines her head. The whole scene suggests airiness, ease, and the pleasant exchange of harmless thoughts. But that ease is carefully made, because in this world, speaking well does not mean speaking freely. It means choosing words that can pass safely through the room without attaching themselves too firmly to you. It means sounding agreeable without becoming memorable for the wrong reason. It means offering just enough thought to seem intelligent, just enough warmth to seem pleasant, and not enough force in either direction to leave a mark that can later be repeated with dangerous accuracy. So the safest subjects return again and again. The weather is always useful. It is changeable, visible, and morally neutral. A breeze may be lively. The morning may be bright. The clouds may look promising, or faintly uncertain, or very seasonable for the time of year. Gardens are also dependable. Roses may be admired, violets may be early. A path may look charming in the afternoon light. Music can be mentioned, provided the response remains measured. A performance may have been delightful. A song may have been very pleasing. A fair may be expected to be lively. A book may be described as interesting, so long as no one sounds too moved by it. That is the important part. One must never seem too stirred. A strong opinion has edges, and edges can be remembered. Enthusiasm is risky because it reveals preference. Sharp criticism is riskier, still, because it reveals judgment. Even sincerity must be softened until it becomes socially manageable. So if a woman truly dislikes a performance, she may call it unusual, or spirited, or rather striking in parts. If she truly enjoyed it, she may say it was very agreeable. If she has thoughts she cannot safely place in the room, she learns to replace them with something lighter, smoother, and much harder to hold against her later. This is where the real social intelligence begins to show. Conversation in Regency society is not empty because women had nothing to think. It is careful because they had to think about everything. Not only the topic, but the force of the reply. Not only the sentence, but the afterlife of the sentence. Will it sound too eager, too amused, too certain, too original, too knowing, too alive? It is not enough to speak gracefully. One must also remain untraceable. The goal was not self-expression. It was elegant non-exposure. To speak well in this world is not to say something brilliant. It is to say something survivable, so the room fills with beautifully moderated language. The weather has been so mild, the roses are especially fine this year. I hear the fair will be very well attended. The music yesterday evening was most pleasant. Such sentences do not declare much, but they do something more useful. They keep a woman inside the boundaries of safety, while allowing her to appear observant, educated, and socially at ease. And yet, for all its caution, the ritual has a softness of its own. The chairs are comfortable enough to hold the body in place. Tea warms the hands, porcelain glints in the light, dresses rustle gently when someone shifts to speak. Voices drift rather than strike. Smiles appear and fade with perfect moderation. The room is calm on the surface, and perhaps that calm is part of what makes the whole thing so fascinating. Beneath the mildest exchange about flowers or weather, a great deal of invisible judgment may already be taking place, yet the sound of it remains low and polished, almost soothing. A woman asks whether the garden will be at its best by next week. Another replies that it may, if the weather continues kindly. Someone mentions a musical evening. Someone else says she heard it was very well received. A charity fair is expected to be charming. A cousin's visit may prove pleasant. Nothing too vivid, nothing too sharp. The art lies not in saying much, but in letting every sentence float just far enough to be heard, and no farther. And nowhere does that soft pressure gather more densely than in the drawing room itself, where speech, posture, rank, and even the choice of a chair begin quietly shaping one another. The drawing room is made to look restful. Sunlight falls across the upholstery in soft, orderly bands. The carpet holds its pattern without complaint. Chairs wait in careful arrangement beside little tables, and the tea tray gleams with such quiet confidence that the whole room seems designed to persuade the body it has entered a place of comfort. Voices remain low. Skirts settle into cushions with a soft hush. A fire may burn lightly in the grate, not for drama, only for steadiness. Everything suggests ease, but comfort here is almost beside the point, because the drawing room is not simply a room in which people sit. It is a room in which they are read, a place where placement becomes meaning, where stillness becomes evidence, and where even a chair can say more than the person occupying it intends. So before she is truly settled, she must first decide where settling is allowed. Some seats are too prominent, some too intimate, some too near an older lady of consequence, which may suggest ambition, some too far away, which may imply indifference. A place beside a young woman of similar age may look innocent enough, yet even that can be interpreted in several directions at once: friendship, alliance, rivalry, strategy, convenience. Nothing is ever only furniture. The room has rank built into it, and the body must learn to read that silently before lowering itself onto anything upholstered. At last a place is indicated, or at least made safe enough by circumstance, and she sits. That too must be done correctly. The descent is controlled. The spine remains long. The gown is managed before it can wrinkle itself into disorder. Hands come to rest without seeming dropped there. Shoulders remain quiet. The head stays poised at that careful angle which suggests attention without strain. The body is meant to look as if it has found ease, though ease is largely being manufactured by muscle, discipline, and a mild but persistent fear of appearing wrong. Then comes tea. The tray arrives with all the quiet authority of a second examination. Cups, saucers, spoons, sugar, the polished curve of the pot, the thin ribbon of steam rising upward as if the room itself wished to look graceful. Tea should be soothing. In almost any other setting, it would be. Here, it is soothing only after it has first been survived. To pour well is to pour without announcing the effort. The hand must be steady, but not stiff. The wrist must angle neatly. The stream should fall cleanly, with no haste, no splash, no little spill of embarrassment onto cloth or saucer. The cup must then be passed with composure, lifted with composure, sipped with composure, put down with such gentleness that even the china seems to understand the social importance of silence. And all the while, posture must continue its long quiet labor. Back straight, shoulders easy, though not too easy, elbow controlled. Chin level. A woman may be speaking, listening, smiling faintly, or doing nothing at all, but the body must hold its line through every version of the moment. That is part of the fatigue of refinement. Even stillness is work. The room may appear to be resting, yet every spine in it is performing. The drawing room looks peaceful because its pressure is social, not physical. The room is quiet, but it is never neutral. It observes through arrangement, through pauses, through who is offered tea first, and who is not, through who pours well, who sits too heavily, who leans too far into ease, who appears beautifully composed without seeming to try. Nothing dramatic need happen for the pressure to be felt. That is what makes it so strange. The room can remain almost motionless and still ask a great deal of the people inside it. And yet its quiet has a softness too. Warm cups settle into waiting hands. Low voices drift and fade. Patterned carpets absorb the sharper edges of movement. Silk brushes softly against carved wood. Someone stirs sugar with exquisite restraint, Someone gives a mild remark about the weather. Someone else answers in the same low, polished register. The whole scene is held together by stillness, by habit, by rules so familiar that half the room obeys them without quite knowing where they end and ordinary life begins. That, perhaps, is the gentlest and strangest truth of it. These rituals can sound enormous when laid out one by one. Where to sit, how to pour, how to lift, how to hold the spine, how to rest the hand, how to occupy silence without becoming careless inside it. And yet for the women living this life, these were not rare ceremonial burdens. They were simply the daytime texture of being social, repeated so often that absurdity and normalcy had long since learned to live together. And once we have spent enough time in rooms like this, with their soft light and disciplined quiet, it helps to widen the view a little, because these interiors did not exist on their own. They were only one visible knot in a much larger social web, always moving just beyond the edge of the carpet. By afternoon, the social world begins to arrive not in footsteps, but on a tray. The way. Cards are small, elegant, and seemingly harmless, arranged in a silver salver with such neat precision that they might almost be mistaken for decoration. Thick paper, embossed names, cream surfaces catching the light, each one quiet in the hand, perfectly composed, and entirely capable of altering the shape of a day. A single card can mean a visit, an obligation, an opportunity, a warning, or the faint beginning of some new speculation that will travel much farther than the card itself ever does. That is the unsettling charm of them. They are tiny objects carrying very large possibilities. The tray is set down, the names are read, and at once the calm of the room takes on a slightly different texture. Not louder, not sharper, only more alert, because a calling card is never just a name on paper. It is a social movement in miniature. Someone has chosen to appear, or to hint at appearing. Someone has remembered you, positioned you, tested you, acknowledged you, or drawn you, very gently, back into the circulating current of polite society. So the cards must be sorted. One may be easy to receive, belonging to a lady whose company is known to be mild, proper, and pleasantly undemanding. Another may come from someone influential enough that delay itself would be noticed. Another may carry uncertainty. Why today? Why now? Why in this order? Why after that conversation, that dinner, that rumor, that glance across the room? Even the harmless cards can begin to feel less harmless once placed beside one another, because each card asks for more than acceptance. It asks for interpretation. Should the visit be returned quickly, warmly, carefully, or not quite yet? Should a reply be sent at once, or allowed to rest for a measured interval that suggests composure rather than eagerness? Should a mother be consulted? Should a maid be told to prepare a gown suitable for afternoon politeness, but not excessive effort? Every answer creates meaning, and every meaning may later be read by someone with too much time and a very steady interest in other people's arrangements. So the desk becomes its own small theater of restraint. Paper is unfolded, ink is readied, a reply is shaped in the proper tone, which is to say, warm enough to be civil, guarded enough to be safe. A sentence must express pleasure without implying dependence on pleasure. A note must acknowledge the social bond without revealing how much energy that bond may require. Handwriting must remain neat. Folds must be exact. Wax, once melted, must seal not only the paper, but the emotion that ought not travel too openly with it. In Regency life, information moved through paper, whispers, pauses, and eyebrows. Reputation was never built in public moments alone. It was built in circulation, and circulation did not end with cards. It merely deepened into conversation, because while paper carried intentions from house to house, gossip carried meaning between them. Not crude noise, not open malice, at least not usually, but the softer and more durable current of whispered interpretation. Who called on whom? Who delayed replying? Who was seen twice in 1 week? Who seemed pleased? Who seemed cool? Who was invited, omitted, favored, watched? A card might travel by footmen, but its social life began only once people started discussing what it could mean. So the room fills, not with scandal exactly, but with the gentle hum of mental ledgers being updated. A lady leans slightly closer before lowering her voice. Someone mentions that a certain visit was returned sooner than expected. Another notes that an aunt of consequence has suddenly taken an interest in a particular young woman. A third observes, very mildly, that a gentleman's family has been calling with suspicious regularity. No one is supposed to sound hungry for these details. That would be vulgar. Interest must remain polished. Curiosity must wear gloves. Still, the pleasure of knowing and arranging social information is everywhere, moving through the room as softly as the scent of tea. And yet, as ever, the physical world remains calm. Cards rest in little stacks on a polished desk. Wax cools into a perfect seal. A pen is wiped clean. A folded note is handed away. In another part of the room, voices remain low enough to sound almost kind. Fabric stirs. A cup is lifted. A name is spoken, then softened by a pause. The whole thing is tactile, miniature, and oddly beautiful, even when it is faintly exhausting. That may be why the social web feels so powerful here. It is built from little things, paper no larger than a hand, notes no longer than a paragraph, half-heard remarks, raised brows, well-timed silences. Nothing in itself seems dramatic, but taken together, they create a world in constant motion, one where a woman's place is shaped not only by what she does in public, but by how often her name passes quietly through other people's rooms. And still, for all the delicacy of paper and rumor, there is one thing riskier than both. A real conversation, held in real time, with real supervision, once a gentleman enters the scene. A gentleman may approach, but he never arrives alone. He comes with distance already measured around him, with eyes that may be watching from several corners of the room, with rules that settle into place before a single word is exchanged. A chaperone stands nearby, or seems somehow to be nearby even when she has stepped only a little away. A mother may be listening, while pretending not to. An older aunt may be observing over the rim of a teacup. Even the room itself appears to understand that this is not simply conversation. It is supervised possibility. That is what makes courtship in this world feel so delicate. Nothing may happen openly, and yet everything may begin to gather meaning at once. He bows, she curtsies. The distance between them is respectable, and respectability itself becomes part of the language. He asks whether she has enjoyed the music, or whether the morning has been fine, or whether the garden is especially lovely this week. She replies in phrases gentle enough to pass inspection, pleasant, measured, and almost perfectly free of risk. Neither voice can carry too much warmth, neither face can reveal too much pleasure. Even kindness must remain carefully arranged, and still, beneath that careful arrangement, something quieter may be taking place. A glance held one moment too long can alter the air. A smile, if too ready, may invite interpretation. A question that would be innocent anywhere else begins to sound charged simply because it has crossed the invisible boundary between a man and a woman under watch. That is why so much of Regency courtship lives in smallness. The angle of the head, the softness of a reply, the pause before answering, the decision to ask one more harmless question instead of stepping away. Courtship was less about declaring feeling than surviving implication. A flower offered at the right time might say more than a paragraph. A fan lifted or lowered at the wrong moment might suggest too much. Even eye contact had to be carefully rationed, brief enough to remain proper, clear enough to acknowledge the other person as more than wallpaper. Attraction did not disappear under these rules. It simply had to hide in the tiniest possible spaces. That is where the fascination lies. because the feelings, when they existed, were not absent. They were compressed, pressed into safer forms. A gentleman might express admiration through politeness, so controlled it almost seemed bland. A young woman might answer with such careful neutrality that only the smallest inflection, the smallest softening around the eyes, could hint that the exchange mattered to her at all. Meanwhile, the chaperone, by saying very little, could change everything. A breath taken too sharply, a step moved slightly closer, a hand adjusted at just the wrong moment. Emotional momentum could be erased by supervision, so mild, it barely seemed to act. And yet, the whole scene remains tender in its own restrained way. The room is still warm with candlelight or afternoon glow. Hands remain folded, voices stay low. A piece of music may be sounding somewhere in the background, soft enough not to interfere with the ritual. Silk shifts quietly. Someone passes with tea. Nothing outwardly resembles romance at full volume. This is romance muffled by etiquette, feeling filtered through manners until it can exist only as suggestion. For many women, that was the real labor of it, not constant passion, but constant management, not grand declarations, but the endless work of preventing ordinary interest from becoming dangerous meaning. To get through the day, intact required vigilance as much as grace. And because feeling could not easily be spoken, society preferred it to be redirected into safer, more approved forms of feminine value, the accomplishments that could be displayed without scandal, admired without alarm, and practiced under full supervision. Regency womanhood asked not only for manners, but for accomplishments. A woman was expected to show that she had been carefully formed, not only in posture and conversation, but in the gentler arts that could be displayed before others and interpreted as evidence of character. Thread, music, reading, dancing, these were never only pastimes. They were proofs, proof of patience, proof of taste, proof of discipline, proof that a woman could be cultivated without becoming unruly, expressive without becoming alarming, accomplished without ever seeming too forcefully herself. Embroidery was perhaps the quietest of these languages. An embroidery hoop resting in the lap could make almost any room look peaceful. The thread passed in and out with such small, precise motions. A flower slowly took shape, a border grew neater with every stitch. Silk lay softly against silk. Needles flashed briefly in the light, then disappeared again. It all seemed so calm, and in one sense it was, but the calm carried meaning. Good needlework suggested steadiness, patience, care, and the ability to remain usefully occupied without complaint. Even a daisy stitched onto linen could become a tiny argument in favor of a woman's suitability for the world around her. Reading offered something more private, and therefore more dangerous. Approved books could sit openly in the hand, worthy and harmless, full of moral instruction or gentle reflection. But novels were another matter, especially the ones that stirred too much feeling or offered too much interior weather. So sometimes the private self had to be protected by disguise, a more exciting book hidden inside a duller one, a page turned with caution, a thought felt fully, but only in silence, in that quiet act, so small and almost invisible. A woman might preserve a corner of her own emotional life from the smoothing pressures of the day. The room saw composure, the page offered escape. Music stood somewhere between display and concealment. At the pianoforte, a woman could be admired, but only within limits. The fingers had to move well, but not too brilliantly. Feeling could enter the music, but not so much that it seemed to expose the player herself. The notes were allowed to float into the room, graceful and refined, provided they did not sound too wild, too original, too full of private fire. Talent was welcome. Excessive talent could become unsettling, so the accomplished player learned moderation, enough beauty to please the room, enough restraint to keep the room comfortable. And then there was dancing, which turned the whole body into evidence once again. On the ballroom floor, Under candlelight and quiet observation, grace had to become visible. A woman stepped forward, turned, withdrew, and returned, all within patterns already known, all within distances already approved. Her slippers moved lightly over the polished floor. Her posture remained exact. Her expression stayed composed. The dance looked airy from across the room, but inside it lived counting, memory, restraint, and stamina. Here, too, accomplishment was being read. Was she graceful? Was she controlled? Did she move beautifully without appearing eager? Could she embody elegance under pressure? These were not idle hobbies. They were approved languages. Accomplishment was not only self-improvement. It was social evidence, emotional disguise, and sometimes the only acceptable form of selfhood. That is what gives these scenes their bittersweet beauty. The embroidery hoop, the hidden novel, the measured piece at the pianoforte, the careful turn across the dance floor, all of them contain something genuine, and all of them are shaped by restriction. A woman could show patience through thread, imagination through reading, feeling through music, liveliness through dance, but only in forms the world could safely admire. She was permitted to appear cultivated, but never too transparent. Expressive, but not exposed. Still, beauty survived inside that narrowness. Thread moved quietly through cloth, pages turned with a soft hush. Music rose and settled into the room like light on polished wood. Slippers whispered across the floor beneath chandeliers and watchful eyes. Even within constraint, something lovely remained. Skill, concentration, private thought, practiced grace. The accomplishments were real, so were the limits around them. And when those lovelier performances ended, the quieter labor of social existence continued. At the writing desk, in the carriage, in the shop, and at the table, where daily life kept asking to be managed with just as much care. By this point in the day, elegance has become administrative. It is no longer only a matter of posture, curtsies, music, or controlled conversation. It has moved into paper, schedules, routes, purchases, timings, and the long polite machinery required to keep a social life running without visible strain. From the outside, all of this can seem ornamental, as if refinement simply floated from room to room under its own power. But from within, it often felt more like management. Quiet, detailed, never fully finished management. The writing desk is where that truth becomes especially clear. A sheet of paper lies waiting, clean and faintly intimidating in the afternoon light. The quill is lifted, the ink is ready, and before a single sentence is written, another small performance begins. A letter must be warm, but not too warm, gracious, but not revealing, thoughtful, but never so candid that it might cause discomfort if passed through the wrong hands or read later in the wrong tone. One cannot simply write what one feels. Feeling must first be thinned, folded, and pressed into language that will travel safely. So the page fills with careful phrases. Health is hoped for, weather is noted, gratitude is expressed, an event is described in terms mild enough to avoid committing too strongly to either pleasure or displeasure. Even when the writer has a real opinion, it must often arrive dressed in polite uncertainty. The letter is then folded, sealed with wax, addressed neatly, and given away. So much effort, and all of it designed to ensure that nothing too human escapes. Then come visits. The carriage ride may be quiet enough. Upholstery soft beneath the hand, the faint motion of wheels over the road, a ribbon adjusted at the wrist, a glance through the window before the house appears ahead. But upon arrival, the calm tightens. A footman opens the door. A hallway receives the guest. A visiting room waits with its polished surfaces. Arranged chairs, carefully placed flowers, and hostesses whose smiles can be perfectly sincere while remaining quietly evaluative. A social call always carries the feeling of being reviewed. How she enters, how she greets, where she sits, whether she appears pleased to be there, but not too pleased, whether she laughs at the right places accepts tea correctly, speaks with softness, notices the room, compliments something suitable, and leaves before the visit has overstayed its own welcome. It is all very civil, it is all very graceful, and yet beneath that grace lies the faint pressure of knowing that every small gesture is helping to build an impression that will continue living after the carriage has taken her away. Even shopping is not free of this. A bonnet shop may look charming enough from the doorway, with ribbons falling in soft colors, shelves arranged with tidy refinement, little hats waiting like delicate arguments about taste. But choosing one is not merely choosing what is pretty. It is choosing what is flattering without being bold, fashionable without being reckless, distinct without seeming vain, modest without looking dull, and if possible, different from whatever a rival or acquaintance may already have selected that week. A ribbon may carry more implication than it deserves. A shape may suggest too much ambition, or too little confidence. Even taste must be negotiated. Then, toward evening, comes dinner. By then the day has already asked a great deal of the body, but the dining room still expects more. Light falls warmly across the table, glass glints, dinnerware is arranged in an orderly little army beside the plate. The air smells promising for a moment. One could almost believe that nourishment will finally be allowed to matter. Yet dinner, like breakfast before it, is not simply a meal. It is endurance arranged into courses. There is posture to maintain through the full length of the table, cutlery to navigate without hesitation, conversation to contribute without becoming too animated, food to manage in moderate bites, soup that must not sound like soup, bread that must not look like relief. A plate may be generous, but appetite still has to remain decorous. Even fatigue must keep its place. The shoulders cannot sink, the voice cannot flatten. The body must continue appearing civilized long after civilization has become physically tiring, and so the evening proceeds by layers. A fork selected, a cup lifted, a remark offered, a smile supplied, a course finished, another begun. Candlelight settles over silver. The room glows, the table shines, everything looks abundant and controlled at once. From the outside it is a lovely picture. From within it can feel like one more sustained proof that discipline has not yet slipped. What looked ornamental from the outside was often logistical, strategic, and exhausting from within. That may be one of the most revealing truths about this whole world. So much of female refinement depended not on grand performance alone, but on the ability to carry hundreds of small social tasks without letting any one of them look heavy. Letters, visits, purchases, meals, each one asks for planning, judgment, memory, and composure. And because all of it is wrapped in elegance, the effort can disappear so completely that only the person sustaining it knows how much energy has been spent. Still, the surfaces remain beautiful. Paper receives the neat pressure of a careful hand. Wax cools into a seal. Carriage cushions soften the road. Shop ribbons catch the light. Porcelain and silver rest under lamplight with quiet confidence. Even exhaustion arrives, surrounded by lovely things. Perhaps that is part of the mystery. The world remains tactile, polished, and pleasing, even while asking the nerves in the body to do far more than the softness of the scene would suggest. And after enough letters, enough visits, enough purchases, enough courses carried with perfect posture, the true burden begins to shift inward. The outer rules are still there, of course, but now what matters most is the emotional discipline required to survive them without letting too much feeling rise to the surface.